Hey, it's Stu, and I feel like I have so many books to talk about that this is going to seem wild. But I actually haven't been reading that excessively. So the fact that I got all these books read is kind of a mystery to me. Smaller books, but not really speed reading. All of these books got a whole lot of my attention, and some of them were buddy reads. And some of them even I wanted to read very carefully. So who knows? I am a fast reader. I don't think that means anything about me, good or bad. It just is what it is. And I'm an avid reader. So there we have it. I am reading for several sort of readathons. Right now, the 52 book club, I'm doing 52 books in 52 weeks, kind of doing all year. I think a couple prompts will get me in the end, but that's okay. I think one or two of these books fit for that. Women's Prize for Fiction long list for 2026 and then backlist. And I think I should make a separate video about that if I have time, and I should have time coming up. The Irish Readathon, which I'm so grateful for. It got me to read two books that are kind of hanging around, asking to be read, and I had hoped for more, but that's where we're at. And the International Booker. Yeah, the International Booker inspired or long listed. In this case, I have one of the long listed books that I read. So, couple of audios. No. Yeah, couple of audios. Mostly hybrid, digital, and physical. Some sunshine like today, but not a whole lot of sunshine, so a lot of digital reading. Let's start with the Irish author book that I read that I've been waiting for, which was waiting for. I put it on hold because it had gotten recommended through several different sources, and then I suspended the hold because it felt like a summer book. And my TBR just keeps getting quite hectic. So for this reading challenge, and I can't even remember which of the prompts the Irish reading challenge. So I'm just going to say it inspired me to read this book. And that was Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Hallworth. Yeah, definitely this author has another book out. Really interested. It really, really intimate, introspective look at coming of age and decisions, discovering sexuality, discovering love, knowing what it means to belong, thinking about the sacrifices one has to make when coming out or not coming out, and what that really means to, like, if they're really your friends and or family, if someone does or does not accept you for who you are. I thought this book handled all of those topics in the way that I find Irish authors doing, which is with a lot of gentleness and humility, but a lot of just really raw emotionality as well. Yeah, I stand by the recommendation made by many people who have read this book and pass it on. I thought that this was a very good book. For the International Booker, on the long list right now is She Who Remains by Renee Carabash, translated by, hold on, yeah. Isadora Anko. Sorry, I had to make it bigger, the translator, because it was a little harder for me to read. This book was told in like what I would call almost like little vignettes. It was a bit distant. Like, I felt distant as a reader, meaning and like even I think like the narrator was a bit distant from the realities. This book looked at what is a cultural practice by the peoples of this book, who are real people in the mountains of Albania, I think Montenegro. In this case, it's Albania, where if a woman, in this case, didn't want to get married, because if she got married, she'd have to get murdered because she was raped, and so she wasn't a virgin. So trigger warning, I guess, post too late, trigger warning. And so she becomes a sworn virgin, and a sworn virgin in this cultural construct means that you will live your life as a man. But then you never, like, you swear yourself to no kind of intimacy. There's so many aspects of this book that just kind of happened again at a distance, and with really quite beautiful prose, that it took me a while to emotionally and even intellectually comprehend all of the things that were happening in this book. And I think that stylistically, that was a good choice. That worked. It took a little while. So for people who don't like little vignettes that are kind of hazy and not, you have to kind of piece things together and nothing is fully clear ever, then this wouldn't be a book for you. But overall, I think as I even continue to reflect on this book, I really liked it, and I would highly recommend it to literary fiction readers, and readers, of course, who would be reading the International Booker long list kind of stuff. So I'll say that much about that book. I'll just continue to go through what I had just in digital, and then I'll go through all my physicals. So William Maxwell, So Long, See You Tomorrow. I'm not completely done with this book, in full disclosure. I have like one chapter yet left. It is a novella. And there's an introduction by Ann Patchett, which I liked probably even more than the book, if I'm being honest. I think there is also a gentleness and a humility to this way of storytelling by William Maxwell that is not necessarily, it's unique to male authorship of his time. I believe this book was written in his older ages, and it's a reflection and an introspection on some hardships in his life. And there's a lot of vulnerability for a male author. Again, writing in this book was published in the 1980s, but the setting of the book is much before that. And so I can honor and recognize that. Reading it in amongst all of these really feminist works was a little challenging for me to say, well, that's something special, because, without the context of the time and place and these really gendered roles, the vulnerability, the humility, the complexity of this book, and even the writing, although the writing is quite good, wasn't super stand-outy for me. And so again, I think if I'd read it at a different time, it might land a little differently. So Anne recommends reading he has two books, like similar plots, reading them together. Ann Patchett, I'm not like on a first name basis with that woman, that amazing author, I guess, that American author, who also has a bookstore in Tennessee. But Ann Patchett makes a recommendation that maybe, if I have time in the future, I will follow. So I'm glad I read it, but I don't think I can give it a super honest review. Finally, the Women's Prize for Fiction long list this year, the 2026 one. I read Dominion by Addie Chichens. This book wasn't at all what I thought it would be, and I'm glad. There are lots of times, most times, that I am quite happy to go into a book blind. And I think the first lines of this book already let you know that it's going to be a bit of a ride. I usually don't like books where sort of religion and humans' relationships with it are kind of the center stage. even if, as in this book, there's a lot of criticism about the role that religion plays in patriarchy and oppression. But I usually just, I find them quite triggering, and it's not something that I feel like I have to explore very much more in my life. However, this one shocked me. I thought it kind of crept up. It definitely crept up on me. So we have this book, the setting I think is Mississippi. And it is a highly religious community. It's a pastor's wife, and their role in this small community. And they have a son, and the son is problematic in a lot of ways. And I think that what this book really reflects on, again, what I said earlier, the themes or the role that religion plays in toxicity that is born from toxicity and oppression that's born from the patriarchy, and pontificated, right, through religious lens. This book really explores females' roles in upholding those harmful facets and tenets of toxic patriarchy. And again, it crept up on me. I'm glad I read it. It was a really interesting, because I'm not done, but I'll just mention it because I'm listening to Sorrowland for by Rivers Solomon for the trans readathon, the trans rights readathon. And it was really interesting to kind of be experiencing both those books at the same time, because there are some central themes that are quite similar, and even some settings points that are quite similar. But more about Sorrowland when I finish it in my next wrap up, and let me move on to the physical books. So I think I'll bring up Ann Patchett's The Dutch House, because I was just talking about Ann Patchett and the introduction that she had written. And okay, when I first started reading this book, I wondered if I was interested in reading about an upper class white family and their house and their trifles. And, you know, it took me a while. I had just, surrounded by some other pretty strong books where intersectionality and complexity around sexual orientation or race or class play in. And so I don't usually like to read about upper classes. I don't find it's not also something that of all of the things there are to read, it's not something I think I need to explore that much more. But I did really, I also wondered, like, do I really, really like Ann Patchett's writing style? This is my third or fourth book by her, and I found it kind of like just meh. When I first started reading it, I'm like, it's very subtle. And that can mean it's both positive and negative. And at first I experienced it as quite bland. And then as I kind of went on with the book, I realized that it was sort of this subtlety that brought you into some more intimate introspection. And the relationship between, there's siblings here who kind of make it through the world and all of the hardships together, who start sort of upper class, but then several things happen to them that in many ways, not in every way, but in many ways, interrupt the class privilege that they've experienced. And so they're very loyal to each other. And I appreciated that. I liked that as an exploration. There's a house in the center of the story. I also didn't really know how I would feel about that. But I do also like, so they lived in a house, the Dutch house, right? And the Dutch house also had its own history. And then when their mother passes away, no, their mother leaves, and then their father remarries. And then there's kind of like that evil stepmom trope, which also kind of made me roll my eyes a little, because it's well explored in, anyway. So then, they're expelled. Well, the older sibling, which is the daughter, she's already away and she's already working. She's already, made it through university. Again, we're talking about upper class folks. And so she basically has to adopt the brother who's in his late teens. And, that's kind of the center of the story and how they make it and how they come back together and their relationship with housekeepers and nannies in their life. So overall, I'm glad I read this book. Again, there are sort of themes that I'm not all that interested in. I was really wondering, especially towards the middle of the book, what is Pulitzer Prize worthy about this book and Women's Prize worthy about this book. Because there's just so many great books out there, and I still kind of have those concerns, and I would still recommend this book to a certain kind of reader, and I think it has a big audience. And again, I'm glad that I read the book. Speaking of the Women's Prize for Fiction, because that's why I read that one, Bettina Gappa, The Book of Memory, was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. This book is set in Zimbabwe. And in fact, I believe this book this is a UK edition. And given the currency, this book probably came either, it came from a country whose currency is not dollars or pounds. I'll say that. So there are also parts of this book. So in this book, we have an albino woman, and I think her albinoism is a character point to add the theme of what it's like to be seen as quite different and what that meant growing up in her village. I'm in Zimbabwe, and she's adopted or sold. She's sold, as her telling, to a white man who raises her and helps her get an education. She's then, we follow her kind of in and out of memory because it's a book of memory, but it really sort of starts with her in prison for murdering that man, and kind of come to know her story through the village, her story through her understanding of why her parents sold her to this man. And there's a lot of work with conjecture and assumption that she and others have, and there's a lot of sort of work with how memory works and what is the truth in this book. I thought this book had a lot of potential, and there were a lot of things I liked about it. I also thought that there were just a lot of ways that just didn't quite make it to the place that I had hoped, both through its craft of storytelling and sort of through its prose. But again, I found it to be a really, really decent read, and I do in fact have a friend I will give this book to and see if this friend experiences, sort of similar disappointments as I did, or if they're able to just kind of revel in a story about a woman in Zimbabwe, about which we don't get very many stories as such in sort of the American reading, book hyping, publishing spaces. Okay, so the last book that I have, which was a backlist of Women's Prize for Fiction, so there's 4 Women's Prize for Fiction books in this lot, is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I had not so distantly, in December, read Circe and liked it. I found in Circe that I was trying to remember what aspects of Greek myths, through mostly the Iliad and the Odyssey, that I could remember having read the Iliad and the Odyssey multiple times for high school and for college, the Iliad, and liking the Odyssey more, and then not thinking about either of those again, for 30 years. I think Song of Achilles, because maybe the Iliad's just I don't know, is it the movies, that came out, the adaptations, as a story that just kind of a little bit easier to follow. I liked this book. There were some parts in the ending I was like, no, I'm sorry, blew it. But I mean, I'm not here to focus on how, there are parts of books that don't really work. I think overall, this was a really enjoyable, I listened to this, and it was a good listen, and it was a good time. I thought that really looking at the relationship. So this book really looks at the relationship between Patroclus and Achilles, and I like that. I like zeroing in kind of on the hero and how they are, the more intimate details of their life and how they're actually, conflicted in a lot of ways, and sort of, Achilles' story being such an important story to the Iliad. Yeah, I thought it was worth kind of taking a deeper dive, which Madeline Miller did. I thought it was worth exploring queerness and true love in as part of Achilles' story. And yeah, overall, I thought it was a good read. It was a good time. I would, of course, recommend this. It doesn't really need my recommendation. It was a winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction. I think it was really hyped, that many years ago. It was like something like 2014, probably, when it came out. But for folks who, 2012, who like retellings, really, Madeline Miller, sets a good stage for the retelling scene. Speaking of listened, I decided to listen to Louise Erdrich's The Round House. I didn't know if, how... Louise Erdrich is absolutely literary fiction, and sometimes is quite a bit harder to listen to literary fiction. And I knew that The Round House was similarly themed to LaRose, and LaRose shows up in this book, and I like that about Louise Erdrich books, that the characters kind of show up throughout, and it makes sense. Like, these are smaller communities, and people have whole stories to be told, but you kind of like the lives of everybody cross, and it's one of the many aspects about Louise Erdrich's writing in books that I love, the way that she explores justice and vengeance. Thematically, LaRose I liked more. However, the way that she weaved together storytelling, coming of age, this book is told through the lens of a 13-year-old who has to deal with a brutal, the setting of the book is he's having tender moments. The starting of the book is he's having tender moments with his father, realizing he's kind of becoming a man and what that sort of means. And then he has to understand and deal with a brutal assault on his mother. So now we have to look at what it means to come of age, and as a cis male identified person in a patriarchy, and how you really have to be able to understand all of the forces that bring you to these moments of brutal assault, because it's not just an individual event. And his father's a judge in this book, which kind of adds to, there's a definite layer of systemic injustice, interpersonal injustice, family vendetta, myth, and storytelling as how we, understand our worlds. She just does so much in this book, and where I see and wanted it to end the way it did. Again, I think LaRose kind of had a little bit more of a sophisticated twist. But yeah, I mean, Louise Erdrich is I don't unhaul her books because I know, I unhauled LaRose. So I've since decided not to unhaul her books so that I can, just anticipate that I will have to reread. This is a buddy read. The person with whom I'm reading it probably won't read it for a while, and another friend said that they might read it sooner. So I have more opportunities to talk about the many things that could be talked about from this book in the future. I couldn't recommend this book enough. I would continue to say, and Ann Patchett recently said in her Lay Down Diaries as well, Lowdown Diaries, why can I never get that right? Anyway, that possibly America's greatest living author is Louise Erdrich. If you read literary fiction, or even if you don't, you read American fiction and you're making videos about great American books, you would be completely remiss to miss Louise Erdrich, and it would probably be telling about your access to voices, right? Anyway, couldn't say more. It was a great listen. Also, I'm really glad I listened. Next time I'll read it with my eyes, probably, but it was a great listen. Okay, now, hard to follow. And I don't know why this came up. It's just been on my shelf for a while, and I thought I needed a little sort of novella that was what I expected this book to be, and that's The Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, and it's translated by Ginny Tapley Takamori, and yes, just delightful, like, you know, those candies that kind of like pop in your mouth kind of read. This woman is so endearing, and just to get her worldview of like not quite understanding why she doesn't get what everybody else gets. And I know that people have a lot of ways to talk about that, but without giving any kind of diagnosis, can we also accept that there are diagnoses and then there are folks who just don't march to the same drums? And this book like interrogates the these expectations that society puts on all of us to conform to, even like how we see ourselves, what we see as success, where we see we belong. And this just it's so confronting in this fantastically I want to say carefree kind of way. Like, and those are two, like, in juxtaposition, carefree and confronting don't seem to go together. And that's what makes this book so brilliant. I see the male character in this book as villainous. and he annoyed the shit right out of me for a lot of reasons. And I think that Sayaka Murata did that intentionally, and also helped to give some kind of scope to these big themes that we're looking at. And she just did it. She did it in this amount of time, and, you know, beginning, middle, and end. This book was a great joy to read. I was endeared deeply to this book, and I bought this book actually at an independent bookstore. And so usually the books that I buy at independent bookstores, I return for credit and kind of recycle because there aren't that many. So if I had a friend that really wanted this book, I may pass it up, because let's be honest, I could recommend this book to like many people. And I think actually, like, this is sort of like the genres that are almost for weird girl lit. Maybe. I don't think that does this justice, to be fair, but I know that I would have a lot of places to give this, but I honestly think because of that, because I would be like, the line would be too long, I will go ahead and probably put this in a very small pile to return to an independent bookstore for credit, which I only do like once a quarter, once every 3 months, sometimes 6 months. So there is that. Now, just 2 more books. I know this video is getting very long. So I have recently acquired 3 Otesha Moshfegh books, and this one I found the 50% off sale for like, this book cost me like 75 cents, and this is Death in Her Hands. To be honest, by the cover, it really doesn't look like that much of a book or that modern of a book, and indeed it is. I think this came out after her Year of Rest and Relaxation and Eileen, which I think is her more critically acclaimed. Yeah, this is a 2022 release. I looked it up on Goodreads. I don't know why, because I prefer to kind of go into books blind, and I've committed myself to trying Otessa. She gets a try from me, and have since 3 opportunities like own in my physical shelves. I had 3, counting this one, books by her now. And it didn't necessarily get great reviews, and I thought, good. I like these low rated books, like Red Car, I think, is another example, where they're just not for everyone. And sometimes they're not for me too, but in general, that's like, tells me so much more than, say, Wild Dark Shore, which every reviewer who actually thinks critically is like, there's some serious problems with Wild Dark Shore, but y'all, don't want to say that much because it's such a hyped book. Yeah. So, Death in Her Hands, elderly protagonist is recently widowed. She moves kind of like to a little lake cottage, and she finds a note. She's out with her dog. She's got a really close relationship with her dog because she's, a bit lonely. It's her and her dog. She's reflecting on her marriage and her life, and she's living alone in this sort of a remote little lake cottage out on a walk, and she finds a note, and the note sort of suggests that there's a body buried somewhere near. And she then creates a whole narrative around this note. Wow, like, I don't always jive with an unreliable narrator. Sometimes I find it quite gimmicky. And no, man, Otessa Moshfegh nails, like absolutely nails, unreliable narrator. And I think when we're dealing with like elderly women who maybe are unreliable in certain ways, we have to be really, really, really careful about like misogynistic tropes that are told about elderly women and how, they become feeble in the mind, etc. And I think that she embraced some of them in a way and then confronted in other ways. And I found this work quite sophisticated. I found it also propulsive. It's a suspense, and it read very much like a suspense to me. And normally sort of suspense kind of annoy me because they get super tropey, and I sort of lose interest because I can see where it's going. And unless the prose is like something really remarkable or the setting of their characters are standing out, I'm like, paint by number. So the fact that this read very much like a suspense, she uses the suspense tools. And yeah. How can I say this book comes under high recommendation? It has like a 3.2 rating on Goodreads. And if you're into popular books, maybe, read some of the higher and lower ratings to decide where you might land for this. But I thought this was a great ride. And to be honest, I entered it a little skeptically. I did. The last book I have to talk about today is Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus. Okay. Sometimes just having a straightforward little story that's kind of funny and, tells the story of white feminism. It's okay. I found the chapters are super short. It's for commercial consumption, and I can see it being received well as such. Most of the time that really worked. I also, have to keep in the context that when this book is set in 1961, where it's true that this protagonist is having a very hard time, getting accepted as a chemist. Black women are getting beaten as they're trying to obtain the right to, or as they're trying to practice their right to vote. And so I find sometimes telling these stories without like some context of what's going on around can be useful. Like, sometimes you just need the story. And then also it's a little hard to it's hard to not in where we are now, 2026, 1960s, right? Think about it singularly without the complexity of what's going on all around. This was absolutely Simple White Feminism 101. Absolutely. Women still go through much of what this protagonist went through. I found her quirkiness a little gimmicky, and that was a little unfortunate for my reading pleasure. And by the end, it got really incredibly predictable how it was going to end for me. And so I found myself kind of bored and just kind of skim reading to get through the rest of this story. I, was asked recently what I thought about this book, and I said I hadn't read it, but I thought it was going to be like a highly commercial kind of fun ride. And I wasn't wrong. I think this book goes right into a little free library. I've just seen this book was so hyped that I now just see it everywhere. In every used bookstore, there are multiple copies, and at the Friends of the Library, there are multiple copies. So yeah, I mean, it is, my feedback is all of those things I just said. I mean, it's not a short book. It's like 330 pages, and it's propulsive. The chapters are very short. So if that's the kind of book you like to read, then this, book will work for you. And probably if you check, because I haven't, on something like Storygraph or Goodreads, it's going to get decent reviews because it's very commercially viable. And perhaps, like, if you're someone who uses those sources, rely on them more than me, because I wouldn't. I think of all of the books that I just talked about, that would be the lowest rated book of this whole reading experience. So I hope my next wrap-up video will be shorter, because this was like, there was almost a couple of weeks of reading. Still seems a lot, huh? It was a longer period than I normally go for making videos of reading, and it was a lot of reading. And I think this next week I could read a lot too, and then for lots of reasons in the spring it will slow down quite a bit. So until next time.